The newly returned leaders of Afghanistan claim they won't be repeating the horrors of their previous rule. In an extraordinary press conference, the Taliban took questions from local and international media, claiming there would be no revenge attacks against those who supported the US and allied forces. There was also talk of commitments to women's rights and the media, but the caveat is that will be within the framework of the Taliban interpretation of Sharia law. North America correspondent Barbara Miller joins us now from Washington. Barbara, g'day. So what was the detail of what was said and what's been the reaction?
Well, as you said, Joe, in this extraordinary event, the Taliban spokesman said that for those who had worked with US forces, and he spelled that out, translators, for example, or those who had worked in other functions with Afghan forces, there would be no retribution, there would be no revenge. He said they would benefit from an amnesty, and that he wanted these young people, these educated people, to stay in Afghanistan. On that issue of women's rights, not too much was said, but just that women were an integral part of society and that their rights would be respected. As you said, though, we're still waiting to hear for what exactly that means. Will they be able, for example, to exercise high political function? What restrictions will there be on their daily life? The Taliban also saying that their country wouldn't become a safe haven for terrorists. Of course, the US's reason for going into the country in the first place was to get Osama bin Laden, to eliminate the threat from Al-Qaeda. So they were offering reassurances there that their country wouldn't be fertile ground for that kind of activity again. In some ways, I think the international community didn't quite know what to make of this press conference. We also heard that the international community is dependent on an agreement from the Taliban, the US confirming that they've guaranteed at the moment safe passage for those thousands of people hoping to get to Hamid Karzai International Airport and to get out of the country. But the US National Security Advisor again taking the line today that although things happened much quicker than they had anticipated with the Taliban takeover, they would wait and see exactly what the Taliban rule would bring.
When you conclude 20 years of military action in a civil war in another country, with the impacts of 20 years of decisions that have piled up, you have to make a lot of hard calls, none with clean outcomes. What you can do is plan for all contingencies. We did that. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the Taliban to show the rest of the world who they are and how they intend to proceed.
And Barbara, that Taliban media conference was happening in the same city as where this huge evacuation effort is happening at the airport there. What's the latest from Kabul airport?
Well, things are calmer there today after those chaotic and desperate scenes we saw yesterday. We hear there will be an investigation into those people, or how it came to be that people were able to climb onto the underbelly of that US military plane. And we will hear whether those people who were seen in that harrowing video to be appearing to fall to the ground, whether they in fact died during that. But they say from the US side, things are calmer. Flights are going out. About 700 to 800 people have gone out so far, 165 of those American nationals. And the US says it really hopes to ramp up that effort in the coming days. It says that ideally it would be getting 5,000 to 9,000 people out per day, and that's on one flight per hour. But of course, all those statements come with caveats that, of course, the situation on the ground could change at any moment.
Okay, Barbara Miller reporting there from Washington. And the mission to evacuate Australians from Afghanistan has begun, with the government hopeful it can get around 600 people out of the country. Political reporter Matthew Doran joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Matt, g'day. So what can you tell us about this operation?
Well, we know that an Australian C-130 Hercules flight has been able to get into Kabul. The RAAF plane was picked up on flight tracking websites, leaving a base in the Middle East overnight. It then switched its transponders off when it got over Pakistani airspace, but in the last half hour or so, it has been picked up again on flight trackers. And while we have no formal confirmation from the government so far that there are evacuees on board, it is understood that some people have been able to get on that flight and get out of Kabul. Sources in the Afghan capital have told the ABC that they were in fact told by the government to try to get to Kabul airport last night to get on this plane. We know that the government is wanting to get around 600 Australians out of Afghanistan in the next couple of days, a mixture of Australian citizens and permanent residents, staff who'd been working at Australia's embassy, local contractors who had been helping the Australian Defence Force over the last 20 years that it's been in the country there. So it appears some have managed to get on that flight and get out of the country. But as I said, we await formal confirmation as to exactly how many have been able to get on that flight as part of this evacuation mission.
And what's been the discussion around the effectiveness of this operation?
Well, the government has been criticised by many about delays to this evacuation process. It was only a couple of weeks ago that the federal government said it was not going to be joining a United States-led mission to evacuate people from Afghanistan. We've heard from a number of veterans, from lawyers representing those who are in Afghanistan, that they have been putting forward names for many, many months now, saying that these are people, particularly the Afghan nationals, these are people that have supported Australia's cause in Afghanistan over these last 2 decades, and they therefore deserve the respect and the protection of the Australian government moving forward. But we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday suggesting that not all of the Afghans who helped Australia throughout this period will be able to be rescued, given the fact that this situation has deteriorated so dramatically. So we will wait to see just how many can be evacuated from the country. They will be taken first up to a base in the Middle East for processing before being brought to Australia. Exactly how long that process in and of itself will take remains unclear. There are around 250 Australian Defence Force personnel who have gone over to the Middle East to assist with that process. And of course, once they come back to Australia, once they're brought to Australia, they will also have to go through a quarantine process, considering the coronavirus restrictions that are present. But we'll continue to monitor this situation throughout the morning, Joe, and bring you the latest as it comes to hand.
Yeah, and Matt, taking into account what was said at that Taliban media conference overnight about their pledging to be no revenge attacks and no one's going, the suggestion that no one is in danger, is there talk now about, is there any talk at all about the Australian government being able to get everyone out who wants to get out, who has supported Australia over the recent, the past couple of decades?
Well, as I mentioned, Joe, the Prime Minister effectively conceded yesterday in his press conference that there are going to be some people who are left behind, and no doubt many are looking at the comments from the Taliban in that press conference that you've cited there and suggesting that, well, it's all well and good to say that, but past actions by the Taliban while they were in charge of Afghanistan more than 20 years ago suggest otherwise, suggest that they might not necessarily follow through on those comments that they have made overnight. So it is a very dangerous and dire situation for Afghans who are in Afghanistan, who are trying to get out of the country. And while the federal government is saying that it's committed to getting as many out as possible, it's also putting in place those caveats to suggest that maybe not everyone will be able to get out.
Yeah. Okay, Matthew Dorn reporting there from Canberra.